mouth and the meditations of my heart be pleasing in your sight, O Lord. Amen.
Amen.
So I should introduce myself. My name is Miriam. Maybe I've met some of you guys. Your connection to me might be through Pioneer Camp. I'm the Girls Camp Director at Ontario Pioneer Camp, which is located about 2.5 hours north of here off of Highway 11 in Huntsville. So you might be asking, why am I here? That's a good question. So basically, I love making connections with people. I like talking about my experiences with camp and with faith, and this is kind of a way for me to bring that together. So I am speaking about the lessons that were given to me. So that was kind of nice. I just got to choose from one of them. I didn't have to think of it on my own. That was a little bit nice. So I wanted to actually start off by telling you a little bit of a story, and naturally about camp. It may be a surprise to you, but actually in the beginning of my experience at the camp, I didn't actually want to go to camp. My first year was we have something called an LIT program, so leadership and training, where you go and you are kind of you're taught how to be a leader at camp. So my younger sister and my brother were both people who had gone to camp, and they had told me how great it was and how much they loved their experience. My brother had just done this LIT program not too many years before me, and they're like, you gotta go, and I was like, I'm okay, it's not really for me, I'm not that into it, I'd rather just be in the city with my parents, it's cool. But in the end, I was like, fine, I'll go. I was a little bit skeptical, I wasn't totally convinced, but I decided to go anyway, just because my siblings had said it was a good idea. I actually remember on the way there, I really didn't want to go so bad that I was trying to make us late. I made a stop at I think it was a outlet mall, so that I could prolong that experience a little bit more. So, but then we eventually made it, and it wasn't a perfect experience by any means, but I think obviously I enjoyed it because I'm now directing one of the sites. But there's something, I think, when I went to the camp, it was something about the environment, about being with the staff and the campers, and about having an opportunity to make an impact on someone's life that drove me, or kind of drew me to come back year after year, and really affected me. So the reason why I tell that story is because we just read in the Gospels the story of Philip and Nathaniel, and I think as I was reading through that story, I kind of felt like Nathaniel maybe had a similar experience to me a little bit when he was going to meet Jesus for the first time. So as I was reading through John, he said two things that struck me as I was reading. He said, one is that I don't think I've ever really read this passage very well, either I've never read it or I just glazed over it, because I think it's something that quickly you read over, oh, he meets him, and then it's over. And then the other thing that struck me about it was this relationship between Philip and Nathaniel, and the back and forth they have. And I think I've felt like I've had similar relationships or similar discussions with people that they did. So what they said basically is, just before we come to this passage, we see that Jesus had been calling some disciples, and he calls Philip, and Philip is like, okay, I'm in, let's do it. So he goes to Nathaniel, he's really excited, and he says, guess what? We found the one that the prophets have been talking about. We found the one we've been waiting for, this Jesus of Nazareth. And Nathaniel I think he stops listening after he hears Nazareth, because basically what he says is, oh, well, what good could come out of Nazareth? He doesn't even hear the fact that it's someone that we've been waiting for, it's a prophet. He says, well, what good could come out of Nazareth? And it's kind of sassy, actually, I think. And instead of Philip, being defensive or backing away, or deciding to make a bunch of lists of well, actually, this guy came out of Nazareth and this is happening now. He just says, you know what? Just calmly says, come and see for yourself. And I think I was really impressed with Philip, because I don't know if I'd be able to do that. Because I don't know if in discussions when you're trying to say something and you're excited about it and someone comes back at you, it's easy to respond in a defensive, or I might have been just okay, it's okay, Nathaniel, peace, I'm going. I'll just go on my own to meet Jesus. But no, he says, no, come and see for yourself. And the other thing this interaction reminded me too of as well was, so Nathaniel says, well, what good could come out of Nazareth? And I think Philip is what he's saying is, well, come and see that Jesus is the good that will come out of Nazareth. And I think in some of my discussions I've had with people, I can sometimes feel, I worry that people may ask, if I'm talking about my faith or if I'm talking about Christianity, I worry they might say, well, what good could come out of Christianity? When so many things have been done that have been questionable, like in the name of Christianity. But I think the same response could apply to that too, is that, well, Jesus is the good that comes out of Christianity. And kind of we need to let people see that too, as Philip encouraged them. In a commentary I was reading on this passage, the author, his name was Michael, I never heard of him, but he had some good words to say. He said that the spread of Christianity was often from person to person. It was often like a meaningful interaction between two people, or was someone telling a personal story, or in the case of, in the New Testament, like meeting Jesus in the flesh. And he says he suggests that people became Christians initially because they saw what Christian faith did for other people in their lives. They saw how powerful it was in someone else's life, and that's kind of like what changed them. And he said it's not our task to prove or to persuade or to convince, but to like do as Philip says, to say, come and see, and to tell your story of what God is doing in your life and who Jesus is. And I think, and even though it was true at that time, I think it's still true for us today. So we doing as Philip said, to say, come and see. And I think the hope is that as we tell people like what God is doing in our lives and how he's a part of our lives, that they'll see that for themselves too, and that we can be a part of them seeing that God is present in their lives and he's active in their lives, even if they can't see it themselves, that God is present in all of our lives. And I think that can be a powerful thing. So back to the story, we see once Nathanael meets Jesus, something kind of profound happens. Jesus makes it obvious that he knows him. He says, I saw you under the fig tree, or he says something like, there's no deceit in you. And then right away Nathanael's like, oh gosh, like you're the Son of God, the King of Israel. Like it's obviously that something like changed in him. He's like, this guy's for real. And I think part of when I was reading, my interpretation was a little bit, I think why it was so powerful was him, because he saw, one, that he was known by someone who obviously has great power. If he sees him and he knows him already. And I don't know, I think it's cool that Jesus is invested in his life. He knows him and he wants to know him more, and he wants to call him. And the other thing I love Jesus' response in this story, because it's kind of like he's like, you believe because I saw you under a fig tree? Like, that's not even that cool. Like, let me show you I can do even greater things. And he says that to him, like, this is amazing. You believe because I saw you under a fig tree, but like, let's just come and see, and there's going to be so many greater things for you there. This encounter shows that I think when people meet Jesus, they are changed and affected. I think other examples of this we can see, like when Zacchaeus, the guy who was in the tree, came down, he changed his ways. The woman at the well, when she met Jesus, the thief that was crucified next to Jesus at the cross, he immediately said, like, take me. Now I'm forgetting what he said, but basically he was changed. The centurion at the foot of the cross, all those people, when they met Jesus, their lives were affected and they were changed. So I think past summer, we had a camper who had been coming to camp for many years. She came from not much of a faith background. She came from kind of a tough background, but even after, like, she would come to, we have Bible studies every morning at camp, and we sing worship, and the staff talk about their faith a lot at camp. But she was always kind of like a bit skeptical, or in my eyes, it didn't seem that receptive to it or that interested. But last summer, one of her leaders came to me and said, such and such, I won't say her name in case some of the people here know her. She said to her that I see something in the staff here. What she said was, I see a lightness in them, and I want that for myself. And for me, I think even though she didn't know how to name it or what it was, I think what she saw in the end was Jesus shining through these people to her. And she saw people, or Jesus working the lives of the people around her, and probably in herself too. Because even in those few years that she was at camp, I saw cool things happen in her life, and her behavior change, and how she acted towards people, and how she began to care for people and to love people on the site. And I think in that moment I realized that sometimes I don't give God the credit that he deserves and like how he can reach people far beyond like even what we're doing in our lives. Yeah, so I thought that was kind of, for me, it was a way to see that, okay, yeah, I can invite people, but also God is the one that changes and reaches them. So we've been talking about inviting and saying, come and see to people in our lives, and I thought I had when I was doing this, and maybe you're having too as well, like, what if I don't know what God is doing in my life? Or what if I am not sure what to say to people? And share of what God is doing, I should say. And how do I tell them what Jesus is doing? So I think when I go to, another reading we had was in 1 Samuel, and I think that's the story of Samuel being called by God is kind of helpful in this situation too. So before the part that we read, Samuel's like, I keep hearing this voice, and he thought it was Eli, his kind of like mentor. And he was like, no, it's not me. Go in again, it's not him again. So he says, I think it's God. Like, so next time, just say, speak, Lord, for your servant is listening. And I think a big part of Samuel actually hearing from God is exactly that, was simply just listening. And as simple as that sounds, I think like that's something that we can use in our lives too. It's just this act of listening more and paying attention more and being sensitive to God's voice and what he's doing in our lives. And in the end, you can see with Samuel that God had a very important message to say to him once he was able to say, speak, Lord, for your servant is listening. So for me, that was a challenge to be like, okay, yeah, like I do need to pay attention more. I do need to be more sensitive to what God is doing in my life or to what he's doing in other people's lives and being okay to share that. I was talking to a friend actually last night when I was talking about this, and she said, I kind of feel like, this is now back to the Philip and Nathaniel story, she said, I kind of feel like Nathaniel in this story. Like, and I said, well, actually, probably a lot of people do, where they feel like a little bit skeptical of what, Jesus is about or that sort of thing. Or they feel like people have been trying to persuade them or convince them of something they're not totally sure of yet. Or they feel like they haven't really met Jesus. And I think that what I would say to that is that it's the same sort of thing. Like, I think Jesus is present and he's working in the life of everybody. And the same challenge applies to people who feel that way too, is that be listening, be paying attention. I think that God will bring people into all of our lives that will help us meet Jesus or will invite us. And I think when I was thinking about this idea of an invitation, I think it's an open invitation from Jesus. It's not just like you meet him once and you're good, the invite's over now. I think it's more like there's always times in our life where we need to meet Jesus and ask him to, like, and experience Jesus in our life and have people in our lives who are going to be Jesus to us and to be that presence in our life and be reminded of how God is working in our lives. And so I think that's kind of like we're always kind of a Nathaniel or a Philip. I kind of feel like it's not either or. Yeah. And I think one other thing I wanted to mention just is that not the idea of, I don't think we're called to be like passive about it. I don't think it's like I just, hoping that Jesus will shine through our lives through what we're doing. But, and if we look at these stories, neither Philip or Samuel was passive or were passive. They were both active in telling or, inviting, and they were active in listening. But the thing they did was they let Jesus be the one to speak. It wasn't about their words, it was about, who Jesus was and allowing him to speak. Yeah, but in closing, I want to go back to actually the LIT experience I was talking about because, as I mentioned in my LIT experience, it was the camp, it was the environment, it was the opportunities I had there once I got there and I was a part of what was going on in the community. And I think in the same way, that's what kept me working there year after year. And I think in the same way, even though we're the ones maybe inviting people or being Jesus to people, I think, and Jesus will be what draws people back to him. He will be the thing that changes their lives. And I think that in a way takes the pressure off us a little bit, which is nice. But yeah, just a reminder that Jesus will be what draws people back to himself, and he will be the thing that changes people's lives. Oh yeah. Yeah, I forgot. Questions.
Yeah, thank you, Miriam. So, comments, questions? I'm sure that a lot of our younger members that go to camp are happy that you didn't tell any embarrassing stories, but you can talk to me later. I keep a file. So, just kidding. So, does anyone have something to share in response? Yeah.
I didn't do it. Okay. Wasn't me, I promise. Okay. So I know most of you know who I am. I'm Riley, but just for context, Miriam's my boss. You've been the director at GC now for 2 years? Yeah. Right. So when Miriam was talking, part of what really stuck out to me was speaking into someone's life without having really any idea about what's going on. And this is going to be a little bit complimentary. Just prepare yourself there, Miriam. That's very much the role that Miriam plays at our camp, I think. The investing in someone's life is a huge aspect, I think, of what happens at camp. And I can't really remember a time at camp that Miriam wasn't there for. Maybe I have a short memory, but my camp experience was based around Miriam, and then I became staff in the last few years. And just having interviews with Miriam where someone can speak into your life without really having any idea about what's going on in your world or the struggles that you're dealing with, and somehow just manage to say the right thing. I think that's kind of where Jesus shines through, and certainly where I see him in you, Miriam. Shining through without having, I think part of, the biggest part is that you don't necessarily have any context of the person's life, or about the impact that you could potentially be making by saying whatever. I think that I've spoken here before about, I struggle with depression, and the way that one of my interviews, going back to camp with Miriam, happened was basically just her saying, okay, so that's something that's going on in your world. And then just saying, how do we deal with that? And just stuff like that, I think, is one of the most important parts of what's going on in the story, too. Just follow me. Let's just go check it out. We can make it work. I just thought that was something that really stood out to me.
Thank you, Riley. Someone else? Of all the kids in a row. Yeah, Monica.
This doesn't really come out of this morning, but it comes out of the passage. When I was preparing prayers of the people, which I'll do later, I was impressed that Jesus did not go to find Nathanael. He allowed Philip to find Nathanael. And he accepted Philip's word for it. And I thought that was great, that our Lord wants us to be part of things, bringing people to him, even as Philip did. And that's tremendous.
Yeah. Thank you, Monica. Someone else? People are shy this morning. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm Brendan. What I like about the two passages is that both of them, the word that comes out to me is surprised. Be prepared to be surprised. Whatever it might be, whether it's going to camp, kicking and screaming, at least one was prepared to be surprised. Leaving the nice shade of the fig tree to go and see some itinerant from the north. prepared to be surprised, and as a little kid having to get out of bed, as before the story, 3 or 4 times, expecting the normal, expecting that old guy that he was working for to be calling him to need yet one more thing, but it wasn't. It was something he wasn't expecting at all. He was at least prepared to be surprised.
Thank you. So who here has been to Pioneer Camp at some point? Okay. Okay, quite a few. Yes, we figured. Okay. Hey, Zach. Zach, what was the biggest surprise for you when you went to Pioneer Camp? Do you remember?
I don't remember.
You don't remember? Okay, what was your favorite part of Pioneer Camp?
I don't know. I like the food.
You haven't even got to voice camp yet.
Somebody else? Yeah.
I get to talk now. Something that really surprised me is how accepting everybody is, and how, everybody can relate, and help each other with any kind of problems, and how much we all have in common. Like, I would hang out at the bike shop a lot, and I would just like chill down there, and we would go like dirt jumping and all that kind of stuff, and I got to relate to a lot of the guys there, and not only talk about bikes, but like problems I would have at home with family and stuff like that, and it's a lot of fun.
That's good. That's good. Thank you. What am I looking? Faith, yeah.
Something that really surprised me was, sorry, I'm sick. This church is my family. I've been here since I was a baby, and I can really say anything, and no matter how stupid it might be at the time, and I feel like no one's going to judge me. When I went to camp, it was my first year in girls' camp this year, I would have my counselor, and that would be the first time I've ever met her, and I felt like I could just talk to her about anything. I think that's one of the main things about Pioneer Camp that surprised me.
Nice. Thank you. Others? Cool. Other surprises, things about camp? Okay. All right. I think, one of the things about camp that's really interesting to me, I did camp, I grew up in the States, but I did Christian camp down there. And one of the things that always struck me was how nerds can rule in camp. Right? I mean, because there's this way that kind of the whole social world gets reset when you go to camp. And you have this opportunity to define a new sort of personality, right? It's really, really cool. And to me, there's a certain kind of notion of forgiveness in that or something, that... Yeah.
I have never been to Pioneer Camp, but as a kid growing up, I went to ISCF camp, which is Inter-School Christian Fellowship Camp. And the things that surprised me there, I'm sure a lot of these kids are surprised at too, which is the ability for all classes of people, black, white, Chinese, rich, poor, rich families, poor families, at camp with just a bunch of kids, right? So for me, that was the thing that surprised me, where I could speak to Wardy Simpson. His father owned Simpson Motors, probably one of the wealthiest families in the country, right? I could speak to, that's the first time actually that I got that close to a white person was at camp, believe it or not. I'm serious, at camp, right? At camp, I got to sleep. And look, things have not changed. But seriously, camp really showed me that it doesn't matter who we are all the same in the eyes of God. And I'm sure you guys must share that same thing. What do you think about that part? Talk to us about how you feel about being the same in the sight of God while you are there for those 2 weeks.
Thank you. One of the interesting things about these kind of camps, this is also true of monasteries and of churches, is that it's our attempt to create the Christian kingdom here on Earth, right? It's a sort of utopian vision of creating a world based on the principles that we find in the gospel of mutuality and of love and of respect and for every human being and all of that sort of thing. We're all children of God and so on. Yeah, perfect. How do you create that kind of environment in camp? Sorry.
How do you create utopia? Is that the question?
Yes. How do you do paradise on Earth?
The lack of running hot water.
When none of the electricity works, you rely on each other. No, I'm just kidding. I don't think it's like something that you go into it being like, okay, now we have to create this, because I don't think it would be natural then. I think all the things you guys have been talking about are kind of what make it that. It's like exactly what you're saying, like you're pulled out of your regular life and you're kind of put into this place where everyone kind of maybe feels uncomfortable at the beginning, or everyone kind of feels like this is like it's totally different than your everyday life. And maybe that's part of it too, is that everyone could be friends with anybody. Like sometimes I talk to like my staff and they're like, the people that I was friends with at camp, I may have never been friends with in school because we weren't part of the same social group, but I just happened to be like co-leaders with them, and now we're like best friends. So it's like all those kind of maybe like social things that stop people from talking with people or meeting with people are different. And maybe that's part of it, or at least for me, like at a site of all girls, and like what he was saying, like a site of all boys. Like I think that kind of it sets a different tone too. Like it's. I love that girls can see that there's women in leadership and we're running the site and we're a part of things, and they can see like, okay, that could be me someday. And I think that's part of it too.
Wonderful, thank you. Yeah.
Just a couple of things on camp and other like work situations I've been in. I was at a Boy Scouts camp like when I was like very, very young. And they just threw us all in together. I mean, obviously somebody was in control of the whole thing and was mad. But there was a lot of figure it out, guys. You want to eat? Great. It's going to be really dirty if you don't clean up the dishes. There was a lot of that. And we had, when I was in L'Arche, it was the same thing. We would just all kind of like, what are you doing? I don't know. What are we doing? I don't know. We just had to figure it out, And the same with when I was teaching, it was actually quite intentional on the part of the principal. He knew that some of us knew each other, but there were newcomers who we didn't know at all. And he would just book a place for a weekend, and he'd say, well, we'll see you there. And, well, what do we do, Peter? Like, there was none of that. It was like, you want to eat? Great, figure it out, and assign the tasks. And I think there is that kind of community building that goes on here. It's like, well, come on, like, what's it about? Well, I don't know, let's go find out. And Jesus is kind of like that. And he sort of, I think you're right, he plays with them. He says, like, dude, I saw you on a tree. You think that was something, It's like, we're going to learn a lot of stuff here. And so there's that kind of, like a partnership and a fun learning together.
Yeah, thank you, Kim. You're Miriam's mom, right? Yeah. Can I put you on the spot for a second, just to say something about your daughter? I'm just wondering what you would say about the experience of her being involved in camp all these years.
Definitely, Ontario Pioneer Camp has been a great influence for my whole family. Dorothy also went, and my son, as Miriam said. And I think it's been an opportunity for Miriam to use the gifts and talents that God has given her, the ability to love someone unconditionally and kind of trust them or trust the Lord that you can put someone in a place that is way above where they've ever been before, but that's okay because they can do it. That kind of a trust in people and giving them an opportunity. So, and definitely growth in her faith in the Lord, I think. So, I believe God knew what he was doing when he gave her that opportunity, and I'm grateful that she's using her gifts of coaching and loving and encouraging there.
Thank you. Anyone else? Miriam, do you want a last word? Or you? So is this your first sermon, by the way?
It
is. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I do a lot of informal like teaching, but it's usually to a group of teenagers. So they're usually pretty forgiving, actually.
Excellent. Well, it was very, very wonderful to have you here, and nice to have sort of a, camp has been a part of this congregation's life for a long time. In fact, Lori Morgan, who passed away recently, was the camp doctor, back in the, I guess that would have been 1950s, 60s, something like that. After World War II, not long after World War II. I mean, it's amazing, that how far we go back. So it's wonderful to have you here.
I'll be around after if you want to talk to me or have questions.
Right. Excellent. Wonderful. Thank you.